Hello history lovers and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we will delve into the intriguing early life of arguably Henry VIII's most beloved wife, Queen Jane Seymour, the only one of Henry's 6 wives to provide him with a surviving male heir. We will be continuing our story in 1536 and watch Jane's rapid rise to the throne. Anne Boleyn is seen as a usurper, but Jane accomplished the same feat at neck-breaking speed in comparison. But before we start, if you're new here, make sure you like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. And without further ado, let's go! It's the 29th of January 1536. The funeral of Catherine of Aragon had happened, and that afternoon, Queen Anne Boleyn found Jane Seymour sitting on her husband's knee. The pregnant queen went into a frenzy, so much so that Jane was ushered out of the room out of fear of Anne miscarrying. Unfortunately, it was all too much, and later that evening, the Queen miscarried what appeared to be a male fetus. The Imperial Ambassador Eustace Chapuis gives us a better insight into this event in a letter that he wrote to Emperor Charles V on the 10th of February 1536, recalling the event. He wrote, "On the day of the interment, the concubine had an abortion which seemed to be a male child, which she had not borne 3.5 months, at which the king has shown great distress. The said concubine wished to lay the blame on the Duke of Norfolk, whom she hates, saying he frightened her by bringing the news of the fall of the king had 6 days before. But it is well known that this is not the cause, for it was told her in a way that she should not be alarmed or attach much importance to it. Some think it was owing to her own incapacity to bear children, others to a fear that the king would treat her like the late queen, especially considering the treatment shown to a lady of the court named Mistress Seymour, to whom, as many say, he has lately made great presents." We can see Jane's rise in the king's affection. Now, this could be slightly embellished on Chapuis's part on the basis that he had formed an alliance with Jane's brothers, Edward and Thomas Seymour. The Seymour siblings were working together with Chapuis to help advise Jane and her dealings with the king.
Really?
No, not really. I can't back that up.
Right, idiot, yes.
But I think it's highly likely, and not being funny, Jane did not bat an eyelid at Anne's execution and hopped into her shoes and bed disturbingly quick. But I highly suspect that Jane would whisper doubts in the king's ear about Anne, as Anne had done about Catherine, and she probably whispered about Anne's heretical learnings. She wasn't a heretic, but she was alarmingly close. Whatever she did, it worked, as Henry had gone from defending his relationship with Anne to now entertaining criticism about his wife.
Coincidence? I think not!
After the news of the miscarriage, Henry VIII commented that, "I see that God will not give me male children." He then proceeded to complain and blame Anne, who was upset enough as it is. After all, as Eustace Chapuis put it, she had miscarried her saviour. A distraught Anne passed the blame back onto Henry and that wench Jane Seymour. I would imagine that it was about now that Anne truly knew how Catherine had felt, as it was becoming more and more apparent that her husband was potentially looking for another wife, which might be Jane. Henry would shower Jane with gifts and messages regularly, much to Anne's disgust. Anne couldn't afford to trust Jane and kept a close eye on her.
"I'm watching you, Wazowski. Always watching."
Anne would on more than one occasion, using her right as mistress, lash out and even slap Jane. On one occasion, Jane received a locket containing the king's miniature from Henry. Jane pretentiously revealed it in the presence of Anne. However, Anne's jealousy fled, prompting her to forcefully snatch the locket from Jane's neck, resulting in an accidental cut on her own finger. The Life of Jane Dormer notes Anne's jealousy manifesting as scratching and byblows between the Queen and her maid. In a separate account from the 17th century, it was recounted that Anne forcibly removed a necklace, a gift from Henry to Jane, from her rival's neck. Although it's difficult to envision them engaging in a physical altercation, Anne had a known tendency for sudden fits of temper. I'm sure that Anne wished to dismiss Jane from her service, but due to her own unstable position at court, she didn't take any action. In March 1536, during Henry's absence, he found the separation from Jane to be unbearable. Desiring to convey his affection, he persuaded Sir Nicholas Carew to deliver a heartfelt love letter and a purse of gold to Jane. Up until that moment, Jane had been willing to accept lavish gifts, but she allegedly had principled reluctance to accept money. Her aim was to prompt the king to reveal his true intentions. Jane responded by kissing the letter and returning it unopened to Sir Nicholas. She then dropped to her knees, entreating him to plead with the king on her behalf. She wished for the king to recognise her as a prudent gentlewoman hailing from a reputable and honourable family, a woman of unimpeachable character, who treasured her honour above all else, an honour she would not compromise for any sum of money. If the king wished to send her a financial gift, she humbly asked that he wait until God blessed her with a husband to whom she could be married. Luckily for us, we have another insight from Chapuis on the event as he wrote about it on the 1st of April 1536 in another letter to Emperor Charles V. At this instant, the Marchioness had sent to me to say what Mr. Gelliot had already told me, that the king being lately in this town, and the young lady Mrs. Seymour, whom he serves at Greenwich, he sent her a purse full of sovereigns, and with it a letter, and that the young lady, after kissing the letter, returned it unopened to the messenger, and throwing herself, consider that she was a gentlewoman of God and honourable parents without reproach, and that she had no greater riches in the world than her honour, which she would not endure for 1,000 deaths, and that if he wished to make her some present in money, she begged it might be when God enabled her to make some honourable match. Henry, who held deeply conservative views regarding the virtuous conduct of women, even in his attempts to seduce them, was greatly pleased by this reaction. He made the decision to meet with Jane only when she was chaperoned by her family. To facilitate these encounters, she arranged with Cromwell that the minister to switch apartments with Edward Seymour, so that the king could visit her discreetly through a private corridor on a regular basis. Chapuis then continued, "The said Marchioness has sent to me to say that by this the king's love and desire towards the said lady was wonderfully increased, and that he had said she had behaved most virtuously, and to show her that he only loved her honourably. He did not intend henceforth to speak with her except in presence of some of her kin, for which reason the king has caused Cromwell to remove from a chamber to which the king can go by certain galleries without being perceived, and has lodged there the eldest brother of the said lady with his wife, in order to bring hither the same young lady who has been well taught for the most part by those intimate with the king, who hate the concubine, that she must by no means comply with the king's wishes, except by way of marriage, in which she is quite firm. She is also advised to tell the king boldly how his marriage is detested by the people, and none consider it lawful, and on the occasion when she shall bring forward the subject, there ought to be present none but titled persons, who will say the same, if the king put them upon their oath of fealty." In April 1536, Cromwell conveyed to the king that he harboured certain suspicions about the Queen. His objective was to charge Anne with offences deserving of divorce or even death, with the aim of turning public sentiment against her and evoking sympathy for Henry. Cromwell took a big gamble by presenting these allegations to Henry, Anne, like her or not, was still his wife and queen. However, driven by his eagerness to pursue a relationship with Jane, forge a Spanish alliance, and satisfy his desire for retribution against a woman who had made grand promises but failed to fulfill them, Henry accepted the accusations against Anne at face value, because it was convenient.
Coincidence? I think not!
He simply asked Cromwell to provide substantiating evidence. Within 2 weeks, Cromwell had found his evidence, while also recovering from an illness.
I'm too weak.
And Anne Boleyn was arrested on the 2nd of May, 1536. She was tried and found guilty of several charges, including incest and adultery. Anne was supposed to be executed by beheading on the 18th of May. However, the executioner was delayed, so while Anne was having another mental breakdown in the Tower of London, Jane Seymour, on the other hand, spent the evening at Strand and was already carrying herself as queen in all of her finery. The next morning, on the 19th of May, 1536, Anne Boleyn, former Queen of England, was beheaded at the Tower of London. Jane's headspace in May 1536 remains speculative. Being a part of Anne's household, she likely had some inkling that the accusations against Anne might be unjust. However, it is possible that she harboured a belief that Anne deserved a severe punishment, perhaps even death, for her treatment of Catherine and for the religious changes she had supported, changes that Jane appears to have disapproved of. It's highly probable that Jane aspired to become queen and might have genuinely cared for Henry. His considerable charm may have led her to believe that Anne didn't truly understand him, a sentiment not uncommon among women involved with married men. Nevertheless, regardless of her inner emotions, Jane had no control over the trial and execution of Anne. On the day of Anne's execution, Henry chose to wear white, a colour associated with mourning in France, as potentially a sign of reverence for his former queen. He then proceeded directly to Strand, where the echoes of the cannon fire announcing Anne's death could be heard. When Jane was informed of Anne's passing, she appeared rather unconcerned, possibly because she was in the midst of preparing her own wedding and reflecting on the fact that it had taken Anne 7 years to become queen, whereas Jane had achieved the same status in less than 7 months. Within the royal palaces, carpenters, masons, and seamstresses were employed to erase Anne's initials wherever they appeared and replace them with Jane's. Portraits of Anne were taken down to make it look as if she never existed. From that point on, the king never spoke of Anne's name again. On the 19th of May 1536, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer issued a dispensation allowing the marriage of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour. This dispensation was granted because Jane's grandmother, Elizabeth Neville, was a cousin of Henry's great-grandmother, Cecily Neville, Duchess of York. Archbishop Cranmer therefore permitted Henry VIII and Jane Seymour to marry, despite being distantly related through their common ancestor, King Edward III. The official document reads, "Dispensation by Cranmer to Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, allowing their marriage even though they are related in the third and third degrees of affinity without the need for the publication of bans." It's worth noting that the mention of the third and third degrees of affinity might imply a closer relationship. Jane was in fact a cousin to Mary and Anne Boleyn, both of whom had been involved with Henry romantically. In terms of family ties, Jane was closer to the Boleyns than she was to Henry. A day later, on the 20th of May 1536, Henry once again donned white and issued orders for his daughter Elizabeth to be relocated from Greenwich to Hatfield under the care of Lady Margaret Bryan, where she would be kept out of public view. Henry remained resolute in his stance that he would not reconcile with his daughter Lady Mary until she acknowledged that his marriage to her mother was incestuous, and his role as the supreme head of the Church of England, 2 things she was unwilling to do. Lady Mary, who had endured 7 years of insecurity and unhappiness, had become a martyr at the age of 20, plagued by headaches, menstrual issues, nervous depression, and other vague ailments, all while still grieving the loss of her mother. However, the news of Anne Boleyn's death had lifted Mary's spirits, as she now harboured hope, with Jane's assistance, of reconciling with her father. Inside the Queen's chambers, Anne Boleyn's falcon badge was replaced by Jane's emblem, a phoenix rising from a castle amidst flames and Tudor roses. Also on that day, Henry and Jane became officially engaged. Days later, on the 30th of May 1536, Henry and Jane were wed by Archbishop Cranmer at Whitehall Palace. Jane's biographer Elizabeth Norton contends that the marriage was initially kept secret for a few days. There was no official announcement. Instead, Jane was gradually presented to the people as queen. Following the wedding ceremony, Jane assumed her role as the queen and, for the first time, took her seat in the Queen's chair beneath the canopy of royal estate. Weir then states that later that day, the king made her a grant of 104 manors in 4 counties, as well as a number of forests and hunting chases for her jointure, the income that would support her during her marriage. As a wedding gift to his new queen, Henry presented a splendid gold cup designed by Hans Holbein, adored with the intertwined initials of the royal couple and a love knot. The Queen's motto was elegantly inscribed on the cup 3 times. Unfortunately for us, in 1625, during the reign of Charles I, the cup was pawned and 4 years later melted down. Contrary to popular belief, Henry and Jane did not embark on a honeymoon to Wolfhall. This misconception stems from a wrongful interpretation of a letter penned by Sir John Russell in early June. During Catherine of Aragon's reign as queen, she maintained a retinue of 168, a number that Anne Boleyn had expanded. Upon Jane's accession to queen, her retinue had grown to 200 members. Her household was sworn in on the 2nd of June, the day that Jane would make her first formal appearance as queen. 2 days later, Jane was proclaimed Queen of England at Greenwich and dined under a cloth of estate. Due to his leg ulcers and Mary's behaviour, Henry became easily irritated, and not the easiest person to live with. No longer able to partake in physical activities, he redirected his free time towards theological and religious matters. He viewed himself as the spiritual father appointed by God to guide his people. He became more pedantic and dogmatic. Very few would dare to argue with him. Privately, he could be impolite, intolerant, critical and harsh, although at times he could be the jovial king he once was. But this side of him was seen less and less as his health declined. When he chose to, he possessed considerable charm and enjoyed flirtations with ladies.
How you doing?
However, following his experiences with Catherine and Anne, he would never allow a woman to have the power to control him again. Jane and his subsequent wives understood that, to maintain his favour, they needed to adopt an attitude of adoration and respectful submission. Thank you for watching today's video on King Henry VIII's third wife and queen, Jane Seymour, and the mother of the final Tudor king. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a thumbs up and make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And I will see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day.